The Tuesday before Thanksgiving, the office smelled like burnt coffee and cinnamon air freshener, and I was wearing the cranberry scarf my mother knit the winter I almost dropped out of college. It's my quiet little armor. I looped it twice and ducked into the hallway behind the boardroom to find some peace before the quarterly town hall, a tradition our CEO, Victor Hale, loved more than his vintage cars. Everyone called it a celebration. He treated it like a stage. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. I was reaching for the backup mic, a task I'd done a dozen times as operations lead, when I heard Victor's voice carry through the cracked door. "We'll do it right after the charity slide," he said, amused. "Freeze the screen on his number. Ask him to explain the variance live. Watch him stutter. People forget shape, remember spectacle." My name was the one he said. My hand stalled on the doorknob. I stared at my reflection in the brass plate. Tired eyes, scarf too bright, jaw clenched. Another voice, softer, replied, "Isn't that harsh?" He landed the Port Mason contract. Victor scoffed. "Luck. The test is whether he can carry pressure. If he can't, I don't want him anywhere near the merger." Papers rustled. Ice clinked in a glass. Besides, the board likes a show. I should have walked away. Instead, I stood and listened to the man who signs my paychecks choreograph my humiliation like it was harmless theater. He was thorough. The timing, the slide number, the line about accountability. He even rehearsed the chuckle. When the door finally opened, I was gone, back in the corridor, palms sweating, scarf suddenly heavy around my neck. The town hall was 20 minutes away. My team buzzed in the bullpen, sharpening decks and tidying swag bags with company logo turkeys. Nobody suspected that the person scheduled to be paraded on stage like a cautionary tale already knew his cue. I thought of calling my wife. I thought of my father-in-law. Yes, that father-in-law, whose shadow stretches over this company like a cold front. And then I thought of the scarf. In the winter, I kept going when quitting felt easier. Kindness isn't weakness, I reminded myself. Sometimes it's the only strength worth showing. If you've ever found yourself in a moment where you had to choose between pride and quiet strength, this story might speak to you. If it does, I'd be grateful if you tapped the like button, shared your thoughts in the comments, and subscribed so you don't miss the next chapter. Your support helps these stories keep flowing. When I walked back to my desk, the chatter around me felt louder than usual, too cheerful, too careless. My colleagues had no idea that the next half hour was scripted to turn me into the company clown. I sat down, adjusted my cranberry scarf, and pretended to scan through emails, though my mind was elsewhere, running in circles. I had delivered steady results, carried projects others abandoned, and even covered when Victor himself fumbled during a client pitch. Still, in his eyes, I was just another piece to shuffle on his corporate chessboard. What stung most was the familiarity of it. My father-in-law, Richard, had that same air of testing people, as if life were a constant exam. He was wealthy, reclusive, a man who built his empire in silence and seemed to believe everyone else should prove their worth before speaking at his table. For years, I'd tiptoed around him, trying not to fail whatever invisible trials he set. And now, in a different setting, another patriarch was preparing to make me stumble, just to see how I landed. I thought about telling my team, but how could I? What would I say? By the way, our CEO is about to use me as live entertainment. That would either sound paranoid or drag them into a storm they couldn't stop. They needed focus, not distraction. So, I straightened my notes, checked my tie in the reflection of my laptop, and rehearsed calm. But under the desk, my foot tapped like a telegraph key, sending out distress signals. The room seemed smaller. The minutes seemed sharper. And through all of it, I fingered the end of my scarf, wool rough between my fingers, grounding me. It reminded me of my mother's voice, of her saying, "If you're going to stand, then stand tall." The test was coming, whether I liked it or not. And for the first time, I wondered if this Thanksgiving season would be less about turkey and more about truth. Because sometimes the people with the most power aren't testing your skill at all, they're testing your spirit. The town hall was held in the glass atrium, Victor's favorite place to perform. The light poured in like a spotlight, bouncing off the polished marble floor, making every chair squeak louder, every cough echo longer. Employees streamed in, balancing coffee cups and cell phones, laughing about holiday travel plans. I took my usual seat 3 rows from the stage, close enough to seem engaged, but not so close I draw attention. My team settled around me, unaware of the script I'd overheard. From here, I could see the giant screen behind the podium flicker with the slides, growth charts, smiling stock photos of families with turkeys, and, buried in the sequence, the financial variance Victor planned to freeze. The rules were clear, though unspoken. During these town halls, no one contradicted Victor. Questions were encouraged only if they painted him as visionary. Mistakes, when highlighted, were handled with a smile and a subtle sting. Survival depended on nodding in rhythm, laughing at the right pauses, and never challenging the show. My role, according to Victor's hidden script, was to fail. He wanted to see if I could absorb shame and still carry on, or if I'd break under the weight. As the presentation began, I watched his hands. Victor was theatrical. He clasped them, stretched them, even pointed dramatically at graphs no one truly understood. He spoke of resilience, adaptability, vision, words I knew he valued more as performance than as truth. And then, my eyes caught it. Slide 37. The variance. My variance. The trap waiting to snap shut. My palms grew damp. I could almost hear the click of the spring. I told myself, if he calls me, I'll stand. If he mocks me, I'll breathe. And if he tries to strip me of dignity, I'll remember the scarf, the Port Mason contract, and the quiet strength that doesn't need applause to be real. Because the rule he didn't know, the rule my mother taught me long ago, was that kindness and courage don't play by a script. As Victor's voice echoed through the atrium, I found myself studying not just the slides but the faces around me. My co-workers, so relaxed, had no idea how thin the ice beneath me was. Each nod, each polite chuckle felt like a current I was about to be dragged under. But then, a puzzle began to form in my mind. If Victor had scripted my humiliation, could I rewrite it? Could I, in some quiet way, change the ending of the play without anyone realizing? I thought back to the variance, the supposed mistake in the numbers. I had pored over those spreadsheets for weeks. The anomaly wasn't negligence. It was an intentional buffer. I had adjusted the forecast to account for a delayed shipment from Port Mason, which everyone else had overlooked. If I hadn't, our quarterly outlook would have looked inflated, unrealistic. What Victor painted as a weakness was, in truth, foresight. The second puzzle was Richard, my father-in-law. Over dinner 2 weeks earlier, he had spoken cryptically about testing a man's measure when eyes are on him. At the time, I thought it was another one of his riddles meant to remind me that I still didn't belong fully in his circle. Now I wondered, had he known something like this was coming? And then, the scarf. I tugged lightly at it. The cranberry yarn had been my mother's act of love during one of the hardest winters of my life. I wore it not just for warmth, but as a reminder that endurance can be soft, quiet, and still unbreakable. Could I use it now, not as a shield, but as a symbol? Victor clicked to slide 29. My heart drummed faster. I had 8 more slides to figure out how to turn a trap into testimony. If I spoke too defensively, I'd prove his point. If I hesitated, the embarrassment would stick. But if I could show the truth, clear, calm, undeniable, maybe the spectacle he planned would dissolve into something else entirely. It felt like walking a labyrinth where each step mattered. The only way out was forward. Sometimes, the hardest puzzles aren't numbered. Slide 33. Victor strutted past a photo of volunteers packing Thanksgiving boxes, an image so glossy it felt slippery. I steadied my breathing and adjusted the cranberry scarf, letting the wool bite into my palm. Keep your pulse. Keep your ground. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. Once, then twice. I don't check messages during town halls. It's one of my quietly stubborn rules. But the vibration didn't stop. I slid the phone out beneath the lip of my seat and glanced down. Unknown number. 2 texts. The first, if he calls you, show page 4. The second was a file, Port Mason _memo.pdf with a timestamp from 4 weeks ago, the exact week I had adjusted the forecast. My breath hitched. I tapped it open, heart knocking. It was the official logistics notice from Port Mason's dockmaster. Containers flagged for inspection after a random audit, with projected release dates and recommended revisions to delivery assumptions. It was everything I'd based the variance on. Signed, dated, with the chain of custody. Clean. Another buzz. Cameras are for the numbers. People are for the truth. Our Richard. My father-in-law. The cold front in human form. I'd never saved his number, not out of disrespect, but because we didn't text like that. He emailed. He spoke in person. He vanished for months. But there he was, under the fluorescent anonymity of an unknown contact, handing me a life raft I hadn't asked for. I didn't turn to look for him. If he was here, it would be on purpose. If he wasn't, this was still a deliberate hand extended. And something else clicked into place. One of those quiet realizations that feels less like thunder and more like a door unlocking. Victor's planned humiliation wasn't just about me. It was about narrative control before the merger. A public stumble, a lesson in accountability, and the board would accept any reassignments he proposed. But the memo changed the air around the trap. It wasn't my mistake. It was my prudence. I scrolled to page 4. There, in black and white, was the line I'd quoted to finance. Recommend conservative revenue recognition for Q4 due to inspection hold. Revised to Q1 upon release. I remembered sending a summary to Victor's chief of staff. I remembered the polite acknowledgement. I also remembered nothing changed on his deck. My hand stopped shaking. I closed the file and slipped the phone back into my pocket, the weight of it suddenly different, like a key instead of a stone. If he called me, I knew where to stand. I knew what to say. Not perform, not posture, explain. And beneath all of that was a quieter revelation. Richard's tests are never about applause. They're about whether you'll cling to dignity when someone tries to strip it away in public. This wasn't a rescue. It was a mirror. The scarf felt lighter. The stage looked smaller. My fear, smaller. One more until the trapdoor. Victor's voice deepened as he spoke of transparency and trust, the irony almost choking me. His gestures were larger now, pulling the audience in. He was a man savoring the moment before the curtain dropped. I felt the memo like a stone in my pocket, but confidence is fragile in rooms like that. My pulse quickened. What if the file wasn't enough? What if I stammered and turned foresight into farce? I gripped the scarf, and for a moment, it steadied me. Victor glanced at me across the rows, a flicker of triumph already on his face. He clicked the remote. The slide froze. 37. The variance, magnified on the screen. Now, he said, his voice silky. Let's take a moment for accountability. His eyes found mine. Would you stand, please? The room hushed. My chair scraped back. Every eye turned toward me. I stood, scarf draped like a banner, memo burning against my ribs. Yes, Victor. He gestured at the screen, mock surprise playing on his lips. This variance here. A little generous with the red ink, aren't we? Would you care to explain it to the team? His tone was casual to everyone else, but I heard the rehearsed chuckle beneath it. I cleared my throat. My voice came out steady, thank God steady. Yes, the variance reflects a delayed shipment from Port Mason. Containers were held at inspection, and I adjusted our revenue forecast accordingly. Conservative recognition in Q4, revised to Q1. Murmurs rippled through the room. Victor tilted his head, feigning curiosity. Inspection? That's interesting. I don't recall seeing that in any official update. It was the opening jab. The hook was coming next. My fingers brushed the scarf, and I remembered the memo. With calm precision, I pulled my phone from my pocket. It's in the logistics memo, dated 4 weeks ago. Page 4, to be exact. I held the screen aloft, not grandstanding, just presenting. I flagged it to finance. The variance isn't an error. It's prudence. Silence. Then a voice from the finance team. He's right. I saw that memo. Another. We did get the summary. Victor's jaw tightened. He hadn't expected resistance, much less corroboration. For a moment, I thought he might brush it off, pivot the show. But instead, he smiled that sharp smile. Well, good to see due diligence. A learning moment for all of us. But the current had shifted. I could feel it. Eyes no longer saw me as the clown in waiting. They saw something else. A man standing, unflinching, in the light meant to scorch him. And yet, I knew the game wasn't over. Humiliation denied doesn't mean danger gone. It only means the stakes have risen. Because when powerful men lose their script, they start writing a new one on the fly. The applause at the end of the town hall was polite, scattered, the kind that fills space but not hearts. People shuffled out, buzzing about travel plans and turkey recipes. Yet a few colleagues clapped me on the shoulder, muttering, nice save, or good catch. But beneath their words, I caught the question in their eyes. Had I just embarrassed the CEO? Victor didn't linger in the atrium as usual. He closed his laptop briskly, shook 2 hands without looking, and disappeared through the side door. No jokes, no grand send-off. Just silence in his wake. and silence from him, I knew, was rarely a blessing. Back at my desk, the adrenaline ebbed and the dread set in. I hadn't humiliated him, but I had punctured his performance. That kind of bruise, in men like Victor, doesn't fade. It festers. By 5 o'clock, a message pinged. My office. Now, I walked the corridor alone, the scarf warm against my neck, each step echoing like a drumbeat. Inside, his office was dim, blinds half drawn. He didn't offer me a seat. He stood behind his desk, hands braced on the polished wood. You think that was clever? Inside was a clipping, a contract proposal stamped with Victor Hale's signature. A merger draft, terms that would gut entire teams, roll them into faceless subsidiaries, and reward only the top brass. And beneath it, a handwritten note in Richard's scrawl. He was going to make you the scapegoat for this. The memo from Port Mason hadn't been an accident, I realized. Richard had known about Victor's play, perhaps even long before I overheard the rehearsal. He hadn't intervened to save me. He'd wanted to see if I would hold my ground when truth cost me comfort. Why me? I asked quietly. Richard leaned back, eyes unreadable. Because strength without kindness is tyranny, and kindness without strength is sentiment. I needed to see if you had both. For the first time in years, his words didn't feel like judgment. They felt like a doorway. The following Monday, whispers spread through the office. The merger draft had leaked to the board. Questions were being raised. Investigations whispered. Victor's grip began to falter, his authority no longer unquestioned. He called fewer town halls. His jokes landed flatter. The performance was cracking. As for me, I carried on, not louder, not prouder, but steadier. Colleagues sought my counsel more often, and my scarf, my mother's gift, became something of a quiet signature. People noticed it. They asked about it. I told them it reminded me of winters when survival depended on warmth shared, not applause won. That Thanksgiving, passing dishes around the table, I realized the true legacy of that week wasn't Victor's crumbling theater. It was the lesson my father-in-law had tested into me, and my mother had stitched into every loop of yarn. When dignity and kindness meet under pressure, they can outlast any stage, any spotlight, any script. The weeks that followed felt strangely quiet. Victor was still CEO, still polished and commanding in public, but the shimmer had dulled. The board pressed him harder, questioned more often, and his habit of orchestrating little humiliations vanished. He never mentioned our confrontation again, but every time we passed in the hall, his eyes flicked to the scarf at my neck, as if it reminded him that some stages cannot be controlled. At home, Thanksgiving came and went with more laughter than I expected. My wife leaned over as we cleared dishes and whispered, "He respects you now, you know." She meant Richard, but maybe she also meant herself. Respect not for bravado, but for standing quietly, firmly, when it mattered. And me? I learned that sometimes life arranges its tests in boardrooms, sometimes in family dining rooms. But the heart of it is always the same. Will you choose dignity over fear? Truth over performance? Will you stand tall, even when someone powerful scripts your fall? I still wear that cranberry scarf. It has become more than a piece of cloth. It's a thread binding past winters to present trials, my mother's hand to my wife's gaze, Richard's stern tests to my own quiet resolve. A reminder that kindness, carried with courage, can shift the entire balance of a room. If this story has resonated with you, if you've ever had to choose between shrinking back or standing steady, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Tap the like button, share your reflections in the comments, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story. Together, we can keep these conversations about dignity, family, and courage alive. Because in the end, it isn't about humiliations avoided or applause won. It's about the legacy of quiet strength we leave behind.